The contrast between the shouting match in February
You're gambling with World War III.
and yesterday's earnest conversation in Rome, followed by this social media post as President Trump began his journey home from the Vatican, speculating that maybe Vladimir Putin didn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently through banking or secondary sanctions. It all has some wondering whether there was, in the Basilica of St. Peter, a St. Paul-style moment of conversion for Donald Trump, or at least a puncturing of what Volodymyr Zelenskyy has called a Russian disinformation bubble around the president. The US Secretary of State today saying instead it was simply a matter of trying to get a deal over the line.
I think this is going to be a very critical week. This week is going to be a really important week in which we have to make a determination about whether this is an endeavor that we want to continue to be involved in, or if it's time to sort of focus on some other issues that are equally, if not more important in some cases. So ultimately, look, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't come to fruition, then as a nation state, there are options that we have for those who we hold responsible for not wanting the peace. But we'd prefer not to get to that stage yet because we think it closes the door to diplomacy.
This is not the first time Trump has expressed frustration at Vladimir Putin. A month ago he said he was, quote, pissed off with Russia's behaviour, threatening secondary sanctions then, only to propose a ceasefire deal that Ukraine sees as tailor-made for the Kremlin. So is this a genuine change in direction, a deliberate destabilising tactic, or just a flip-in attitude, the familiar flop still to follow?
Well, look, my great fear is that Trump will just cave into Putin. That's been the overall indications all along. It's a sign that the United States is weak. It sends a signal to every dictator in China, in North Korea, in Iran, that if you stand up and bully Trump, you're going to get your way.
For all Trump's criticism of Russia's attacks on Ukraine, Russia launched a fresh wave overnight. 149 drones targeting sites across the country, killing at least 4 people. In an interview recorded before Trump's post on Saturday, Russia's foreign minister said Moscow would continue to target what he said were sites used by Ukraine's military and downplayed Trump's earlier threat to impose secondary sanctions.
Well, we hear many things coming from President Trump. President Trump said that he's sick and tired of the situation in this settlement. We concentrate, as I said, on the real negotiations which President Trump supports and instructed his people to continue to engage in these negotiations.
In Sumy, in Ukraine's northeast, emergency services were organizing evacuations today, warning of increasing attempts by Russian forces to enter Ukrainian territory. President Trump no longer talks about ending this war in a day, a campaign promise he now says was made in jest. A deal in time for his 100th day in office midweek appears similarly out of reach. His threat to move on, ostensibly getting closer, even if the terms of such a withdrawal are no clearer.
Well, joining us now is Professor Mark Galeotti, an expert on Russian security who runs the Mayak intelligence consulting firm and has written some 30 books on Russia. Reasons for optimism, says Marco Rubio. You heard Harry say there, Trump promised a deal within a day, though. It'll be 100 days this week. Is he going to get one by then?
Well, I mean, this is the problem. The honest truth of the matter is we don't know. The issue is optimism for whom? Because from the Russian perspective, they still seem to think that they're in a win-win. That either they get a deal that allows them to essentially claim that they have fought NATO and its Ukrainian proxy, as they put it, to a standstill, or if actually what the Americans would do is actually walk away and stop their support of Ukraine, it very much undermines the Ukrainian capacity to defend themselves. So, yes, we might see a deal, but it does look as if Putin's not in any great rush.
Is this the best deal that Ukraine is going to get, do you think?
Well, that seems to be the incredibly depressing truth of the matter, so long as, and this is the kind of crucial variable, Trump still seems committed to actually withdrawing America's support from Ukraine. I mean, that seems to be the single key leitmotif. Now, if he's willing to reverse that, which is possible, if he truly becomes frustrated and annoyed by Putin, then things look different. But if actually we're just simply talking about that one way or the other, America pulls its support, it's a question of whether there's a deal, then unfortunately this is about as good as it gets.
Marco Rubio repeated Trump's threat to walk away from these talks. But doesn't that just give Russia everything it wants? They want the US to walk away. And also, if this is the best deal that Ukraine is going to get, isn't that also an incentive for Russia just to string this out?
To a degree. I mean, in terms of their war with Ukraine, absolutely. Unfortunately, what the Americans are doing is more or less saying, if you continue to stonewall, we will undermine your enemies, which is not exactly a great threat. However, we also do have to realize that from the Russians' point of view, they see this as something bigger. They see this also as an opportunity to normalize their relationship with the United States, see the American economic sanctions, which really do have an impact, lifted, and generally to, in effect, create a, perverse though it sounds, anti-European alliance with the United States. So one of the reasons why Putin might feel that it's worth going for this deal, though, as I say, at the moment, the signs don't seem at all positive about that, would be precisely if he feels that, in fact, the key thing is to get Donald Trump on side and, more to the point, have the sanctions lifted.
And if this deal does go ahead, then if Putin, as you say, he might go for it, he gets to keep Crimea, something nobody thought would have been possible at the start of all this. That sets a terrible precedent, doesn't it? It tears up the post-World War II order. And what does it mean for countries like Poland, Moldova, or even Ukraine itself if Putin comes back for more?
Well, look, we have to acknowledge the degree to which Putin's military has been ravaged by this war. You know, he spent 20 years building up a military machine, which to a considerable degree was shattered in the first 20 months of this war. He will need to rebuild his military and also deal with all the long-term economic and social problems that are there. I mean, Putin is managing to fight his war. It's not as though his regime is about to collapse or his economy is about to nosedive. But nonetheless, we can't pretend that there aren't very severe costs. Remember, he didn't expect this was going to be a big war. So yes, it sets a terrible precedent in terms of international relations, but Trump is setting terrible precedents, frankly, all the time. But in terms of threats to, particularly to NATO countries, I don't think we really need to be worrying about that, certainly not at the moment.
And just briefly, you know, when Trump wrote this week, you know, maybe Putin's just tapping me along. What do you think Vladimir Putin's thinking then?
It seems to be, and look, crawling into the deep recesses of Putin's brain, no one can really do. But nonetheless, it seems to be that he seems absolutely confident in his capacity to be a Trump wrangler. Because after all, we have seen these false dawns in the past, points at which Trump seemed to be getting exasperated with Putin, and then either they have a phone conversation or Trump's emissary, Steve Witkoff, turns up in Moscow and is given some sort of glorious vision of a future with all sorts of investment opportunities. And suddenly Trump is back on track, as Putin would see it. So, you know, this is it. It may well be that he's going to get too cocky and he's going to overreach because he thinks he's more in control of the situation as he is. But at the moment, Putin seems happy to think that he can handle Trump.
Very topsy-turvy. Matt Galeotti, thank you so much for speaking with us.